On the morning of February 28, 2026, the world was jolted awake by a series of events that would reshape the global order. In a move that stunned both allies and adversaries, the United States and Israel launched a massive, coordinated military strike deep inside Iranian territory. The operation unfolded with breathtaking speed, catching much of the world off guard and sending shockwaves through international capitals. This was no minor skirmish, it was a sweeping, meticulously planned, preemptive attack, targeting Iran's most critical nuclear and missile infrastructure. Dozens of sites, from underground enrichment facilities to missile launch pads, were struck in the opening hours, crippling Iran's strategic capabilities. The operation, confirmed in a tense press conference by Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, was framed as a necessary and urgent step to neutralize what both nations described as an imminent and existential threat. The message was clear. Waiting any longer, they argued, would have been far riskier. After months of painstaking but ultimately fruitless diplomacy, leaders in Washington and Jerusalem concluded that Iran was accelerating its race toward nuclear weapons capability. With negotiations collapsing and intelligence reports growing more dire, military action was seen as the only remaining option to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran. Multiple sites across Iran were hit in rapid succession, signaling not only extensive planning and intelligence gathering, but also a willingness to escalate in order to achieve their objectives. The scale and precision of the strikes left little doubt about the seriousness of the mission. The timing, at the very end of February, was no coincidence. It followed the dramatic collapse of nuclear talks and a surge of urgency in both capitals, as leaders faced mounting pressure to act before it was too late. The world watched as months of tension finally erupted into open conflict. For the Middle East and the world, the question now is painfully clear: what comes next? The region, already fraught with instability, now faces the prospect of a conflict that could spiral far beyond Iran's borders, drawing in neighboring countries and global powers alike. The region stands on the brink, waiting for Iran's response. Iranian forces have been placed on the highest alert, and the world holds its breath, uncertain whether Tehran will retaliate immediately or bide its time for a more calculated response. The risk of a wider devastating war has never felt more real. As military convoys mobilize and civilians seek shelter, the world is left to wonder if this preemptive move will prevent catastrophe, or ignite one on a scale not seen in decades. The path to war was paved by the collapse of nuclear negotiations earlier this month. For months, diplomats from around the world had gathered in hopes of reaching a breakthrough, but the atmosphere grew more tense with every session. The stakes were high, and the world watched anxiously as each round of talks seemed to bring the sides further apart rather than closer together. Hopes for a revived deal evaporated as talks broke down over two issues: uranium enrichment and Iran's ballistic missiles. Delegates left the table visibly frustrated, their faces etched with disappointment. The sense of failure was palpable, and the once optimistic mood had turned to resignation. The U.S. demanded Iran halt all enrichment and curb its missile program, demands Iran rejected as violations of sovereignty. American negotiators insisted these steps were essential for global security, but Iranian officials saw them as an affront to their independence and dignity. Iran insisted on its right to peaceful nuclear technology and refused to dismantle its missile arsenal. Iranian leaders argued that their nuclear program was for energy and medical purposes, not weapons, and that their missile capability was a matter of national defense. With both sides entrenched, diplomacy hit a dead end. The negotiators could not find common ground, and the gulf between their positions only widened. The atmosphere in the negotiation rooms grew colder, and the hope for compromise faded away. U.S. and Israeli leaders saw Iran's refusal as proof it was secretly pursuing nuclear weapons. Behind closed doors, they discussed the growing threat and weighed their options, convinced that Iran's intentions were not peaceful. They argued Iran was stalling, using talks as cover for weapons development. Intelligence agencies ramped up surveillance, searching for any sign of covert activity. while diplomats exchanged urgent messages about the deteriorating situation. The failure of diplomacy convinced Washington and Jerusalem that military action was the only path left. Military planners began drawing up contingency plans, and the world braced for the possibility of conflict. The time for talking was over. The doors to diplomacy had closed, and the world stood on the brink of a new and dangerous chapter. In the lead-up to the strike, the U.S. staged its largest military buildup in the region since 2003. 2 aircraft carrier strike groups, advanced fighter jets, including F-35s and F-22s, and aerial refueling and surveillance planes were deployed near Iran. The message was unmistakable. Overwhelming force was ready if needed. Bases across the Middle East and even the UK hosted American warplanes, poised for action. President Trump issued repeated warnings, citing Iran's crackdown on protesters as further justification. Iran responded with threats of devastating retaliation. The region became a powder keg with both sides on high alert. The world watched, knowing the trigger could be pulled at any moment. The buildup made clear this was no bluff. In the tense hours after the first bombs fell, President Trump took to social media, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen, to address a world holding its breath. He confirmed that he had personally authorized the joint military operation, making it clear that this was a decision made at the highest level of American leadership with full awareness of its gravity and consequences. Trump declared that the mission's objective was straightforward: to destroy Iran's missile capabilities and deal a crippling blow to its nuclear ambitions. He emphasized that the operation was designed to prevent Iran from ever threatening the United States or its allies with advanced weaponry. In his address, Trump accused Iran of secretly rebuilding its nuclear program, violating international agreements, and rapidly expanding its missile arsenal. He warned that these actions posed a direct threat not only to the region, but to global security, and insisted that the world could no longer afford to look the other way. Linking the strike to Iran's violent crackdown on its own citizens, Trump framed the military action as both a matter of national security and a moral imperative. He spoke of the Iranian people's struggle for freedom and positioned the U.S. as standing with those who resist oppression. The message was unmistakable. The United States would act decisively to protect its interests, defend its allies, and uphold its values. Trump highlighted the close cooperation with partners like Israel, reinforcing the idea of a united front against shared threats. Coming on the heels of the dramatic capture of Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro, this operation further underscored Trump's doctrine of direct, unflinching military action. He made it clear that under his administration, America would not shy away from using force when necessary. The strike marked a turning point, signaling a new era of low tolerance for threats and a high willingness to use overwhelming force. It was a message not just to Iran, but to any nation considering hostile actions against the U.S. or its allies. Trump's words left no room for doubt. Under his leadership, America would respond swiftly and powerfully to any adversary. He promised vigilance, strength, and unwavering resolve in the face of danger. As his declaration echoed across the globe, the world was put on notice. A new chapter in international relations had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu called the strike a historic step to remove the existential threat from Iran. He rallied Israelis, framing the operation as a matter of national survival and a testament to the U.S.-Israel alliance. Netanyahu insisted all diplomatic options were exhausted. Iran's leaders, he argued, could not be trusted. Defense Minister Katz emphasized the strike was preemptive, self-defense against an imminent attack. Israel's message act now or face catastrophe later. The nation braced for retaliation, activating air defenses and declaring a state of alert. Israel was on a war footing, ready for whatever came next. Tehran awoke to explosions and chaos as smoke rose near the Supreme Leader's compound. The strikes targeted not just military sites, but the heart of Iran's power. State media at first downplayed the attacks, but soon condemned the barbaric aggression by the US and Israel. Iranian officials vowed defiance, promising swift and painful retaliation. Across Iran, fear and anger spread as reports of strikes near other cities emerged. The attacks shattered any illusion of safety, bringing war to millions of civilians. Military commanders appeared on TV, vowing to make the aggressors regret their actions. Iran's leaders projected resilience, but the nation was plunged into crisis. Iran's response was immediate. It promised severe retaliation. Missiles were reportedly launched toward Israel within hours, signaling the start of direct hostilities. Iran's vast network of regional proxies, Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, the Houthis, stood ready to strike US and allied targets. The risk of a wider war loomed, with the potential for attacks across the Middle East. Iran could also target global shipping, threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz and disrupt oil supplies. The world braced for economic shockwaves and escalating violence. The conflict was no longer hypothetical. It had begun. The strike sent shockwaves across the Middle East, threatening to ignite a regional war. Iraq and Syria, home to both US and Iran-backed forces, risked becoming battlegrounds for proxy clashes. Gulf states hosting US bases, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, now faced the threat of Iranian missiles and sabotage. Civilians across the region rushed to shelters or braced for the worst, fearing mass displacement and economic collapse. The global economy teetered as oil prices soared and markets panicked. A wider conflict could trigger a refugee crisis and empower extremist groups. Major powers like Russia and China watched closely, ready to take sides. The world order itself was at stake. February 28, 2026, marks a turning point, the end of diplomacy and the start of open conflict with Iran. The US and Israel gambled that striking now was less risky than allowing Iran to go nuclear. The consequences will be measured not just in destroyed sites, but in the region's future stability. Will Iran be forced back to talks, or will the conflict spiral out of control? For millions, this is no longer a distant crisis. It's a daily reality. The world holds its breath, waiting to see if leaders can contain the fallout. The shadow war is now out in the open. The choices made now will shape the 21st century.